Welcome. With us, you're not just a listener, you're part of the community, the movement driving real progress. Let's explore how big ideas can turn into real-world positive impacts together. My name is Ronnie Eriksson, and this is the Impact Series.
Jacqueline, Ende. Your career path has taken you on both sides of the investment table. You worked as a private equity investor and a general partner at a VC fund, and you've been building and leading very successful companies yourself. You are the co-founder of Carbon Equity, an Amsterdam-based climate fintech company, on a mission to unlock investment opportunities for everyday people, basically allowing individuals to invest in groundbreaking climate technologies. Your passion for equitable ownership fuels this approach, helping to broaden participation in tackling climate change. Lastly, you're on the board of Trunkers, a Dutch last-mile delivery company focused on sustainability. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You have a pretty impressive, multifaceted background. I see that you're working with really, really important topics, and I think this Catapult Future Fest is exactly the right place for you. How has it been?
Yeah, awesome. Very special. Really a one-of-a-kind type of conference. Very cool, beautiful, diverse, colorful people. And very interesting conversations, which are not your usual conversations at conferences. So I love it.
Yeah, can't agree more. I came the first time last year, and I think I will be always back.
Yeah, definitely special.
Yeah. Each of these episodes, they always start with this like big what if question, just to throw our guest into the deep end, but also to get kind of like the conversation flowing around a subject that normally is somewhat relevant or somewhat near to you. So I'll start with that and then we get into it.
Cool.
So what if everyone invested in climate technologies as an investment in their future?
That would be awesome. I think, first of all, we would raise the amount of capital that we need. We need approximately 9 trillion in annual investment in both innovation, technology, and climate infrastructure. And we're currently at like 3 trillion. So there's still a lot of capital needed. But secondly, and I think that's the thing I'm maybe even more passionate about, is if everybody were to invest, everybody would also be a co-owner of that better looking future. And for me, that's pretty, like when you invest, you become invested in, and people will take ownership of that future. And I think we could create a lot more excitement about what that future could look like. Because I think now when we talk about climate change or biodiversity loss, we always talk about the problem and about a pretty scary future. But with renewable electricity at near zero marginal cost, which we can store in massive batteries, make sure that we electrify our cars, industrial processes, you get clean air. You get a much cleaner environment if we go from meat-based to plant-based agriculture, then we will need much less agricultural land, and we can have much more nature around us, which will improve the quality of life. There are so many upsides to investing in climate technologies, which lead to a cleaner, greener, better, healthier future, that I think we could create a lot more broad, democratized excitement, if you will, about what a better future could look like.
That's really well said. I think if you think about it, like everyone wants these good things to happen. That's like where you see a lot of like people's values lie nowadays. The more and more you talk with people, that's what they are dreaming of. I like your take on the fact that if everyone would actually like own a part of it, then you also would be more maybe conscious about how you deliver towards it. And that's also, we had one guest who were talking a lot about like the DAOs and how you can tokenize things and how you can make people owners of their financials or their like data and all of this stuff. And I think it's a bit same thing that is like needed on this like green transition.
Yes, exactly. People would I mean, there are three advantages. People would put capital towards solving the biggest, baddest challenges in our world. Secondly, people would feel ownership of, it's a different kind of experience when you're walking through the supermarket and you're actually a shareholder of the plant-based burger. You're gonna buy it, right? It's definitely a different kind of experience. And third, more people get to benefit from the financial upside of investing in these technologies, which are also simply great investment opportunities. So I think those three things would help the world progress a little.
Are we already there that it's as lucrative and as safe of an investment bet as many of the traditional ones are seen as?
In my opinion, 100%. And obviously, when talking about climate technology, there's such a range of things. Like, there are 6 big themes that we focus on. One is the energy system. How can we generate clean energy, clean electrical energy? How can we store that energy? How can we use hydrogen, for example, as a clean fuel instead of fossil fuels? But we're also talking about the built environment. Think about air conditioning. We're going to need another billion air conditioners by 2050. Which all use electricity, but also fluor gases, for example. But it's also about the food system. It's about alternative meats. It's about vertical farming. And it's about carbon capture and storage. It's about cleaning the industry. So there's so many different themes. And some technologies are super early stage, nascent, and might only really come to fruition by 2040, 2050. Think about nuclear fusion, for example, or direct air capture, very nascent technologies. Those are still super high risk, and there are also still question marks on whether it will ever work. But then there are also technologies at the other side of the spectrum, which are almost fully de-risked and which are really in a rollout stage where there is this multi-billion-dollar demand, double-digit growth markets. Think about grid-scale batteries. I mean, we are at a really fast pace moving from fossil to renewable electricity. Solar is cheaper in many countries than fossil now. Onshore wind is getting there. But we need to store all that electricity to mitigate the fact when sun doesn't shine or the wind does not blow. So the need for storage, for cheap storage, is huge. So companies like Form Energy, which is one of our indirect portfolio companies, they create iron-air grid-scale batteries where when you run electricity through the battery, it de-rusts, and when there's no electricity, it rusts. So it's a reversible rusting process with which they can save up to 100 hours of electricity at 10% of the cost of lithium-ion batteries. Yeah, the sky is the limit for these type of companies, and they're raising in the hundreds of millions. These are unicorn companies. It can be extremely lucrative. So investing in climate technology, yes, to a certain extent, and investing is always risky, and certain climate technologies are riskier than others. But the cool thing with climate technology is the direction of travel could not be more clear. I mean, there is no alternative future in which we are going to consume or double down further on fossil fuels because we'll self-implode. So that creates this dynamic where all of the most talented entrepreneurs want to move towards climate tech. Governments are putting policies behind it, such as the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, which was a bipartisan bill to put $420 billion towards climate, towards investing in climate innovation infrastructure. Corporates have to move that direction. They have to green. So they are the buyers. That's basically what creates an exit market for these companies, because the shells of this world need to buy these hydrogen innovations or all kinds of chemical innovations to clean their supply chain. So everything is moving in that direction. So I would claim it is less risky to be investing in stuff that solves the climate challenge than it is to invest in the traditional economy.
And I can see that in many ways because, of course, we come from the nature and then we gone a lot against it. And now we're kind of like going back to kind of like try to make things work on the scale they are right now in the modern world. the big problem, in my opinion, is that most of these like big green transition projects, they're like mega projects normally.
Yes.
So you already mentioned that hundreds of millions. It's already like a big digit and not like a normal starting phase startup.
Totally.
Comes in with a 200K ticket and then they make energy park happen.
Yeah.
Then we have on the other side, we have companies like Bolt, do you know, the Estonian taxi company? Bolt is trying to like make it visible for the normal human being. What is it to go green in the cities by maybe using like the scooters? So it's like just a minor solution, but it makes it visible. Like how could it be like to use these kind of things? And now they're building the future of green cities.
Yeah.
So you have all of these different elements. But how do we get forward, or how do we like limit the risk, because most of these mega projects, they normally go over budget and over time, and that's a big problem. So how can we work so that normal people will actually have the guts and the belief also that this is not the case in green transition?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. Let me specify though, if you talk about climate investing, it goes the whole range from investing in seed stage climate technology companies up to investing in billion-dollar infrastructure projects. In general, something that is new about the energy transition is that we're moving from an OPEX economy to a CAPEX economy. Think about well, electric cars maybe perhaps not the best example because you still need OPEX, but think about wind, for example. So you have a large upfront expense at building the wind turbine, but then the cost of marginal energy, the wind is free. So the marginal cost of electricity is very low. And so we're moving from this reality where we spend for fuel to where we spend upfront for capital expenditure and then have free OPEX. So that's a little bit of a shift in the economy. Yeah. There is, I mean, it's a reality that a lot of climate infrastructure projects, but also large-scale, late-stage climate technology projects such as, I don't know, zero carbon steel, Boston Metal, for example, is one of our companies that electrifies steel at a major scale. H2 Green Steel, they just raised in the hundreds of millions of euros, so it's definitely capital intensive. I think what we're seeing at the moment is, first of all, you have a very big investment funds pulling in, and what carbon equity does, we aggregate a lot of relatively small investors. We aggregate big and small investors. So people invest anywhere between 100,000 euros and 25 million on average. But, and we pool them so that they can participate in small and big venture growth infrastructure funds. But these infrastructure funds are coming in with billions of dollars of euros. And these are not necessarily impact investors, right? So there are also a lot of investment funds that are just seeing that green opportunity for what it is as an economic opportunity without even having like a climate impact mandate. The second source of funding is governments. So governments, when it comes to really large-scale infrastructure projects, then governments also putting in a lot of subsidies or grant funding, et cetera, to make sure that these companies pull through the valley of death, where a lot of companies need a lot of capital, but it's hard to raise sufficient capital from the market. And one of the reasons why they're doing that is also because governments need to safeguard strategic industries, in our case, within Europe, right? Or are we going to relinquish our green industry towards China? Are we going to leave it to the US? No, Europe also needs to have a resilient, future-proof green economy. And that's why governments are also backing a lot of these companies with capital.
I like that thinking a lot. Makes also a lot of sense. And yeah, the beauty of like say wind is that wind is actually free when you are in there. Of course, the upfront costs, like looking at, I've been working a lot with like built infrastructure, for example, and the energy transition there. And the problem is that there was these kind of buildings, they normally don't have the cash to do it. But then there is, of course, like those leasing possibilities, and someone actually has the upfront money to like come in. So then it's just how can you allow others to do it, and then maybe build some kind of like SaaS solution around it.
Totally agree. So that's a very good point. I didn't mention business model innovation. So exactly for example, putting solar on your house, getting a heat pump, both for companies as well as for individuals, leasing constructions. Cooperatives where you don't have the solar panel on your own house, but on some factory on the roof, for example, of big buildings. So it's not on your house, but you still buy cheap solar energy. So there are a lot of companies working across the value chain on new financing innovation to make it easier for people to adopt these and to overcome the upfront capex barrier.
Yeah. So it's all about democratizing it and making it actually that accessible as possible.
Yes.
And it's clear that kind of like your impact comes in like finding this good solution and bridging those with capital.
Yeah.
That's super clear in a really interesting segment. But the interesting thing is like, why are you here today? Like, how did you end up there? Where do you come from, and why at Carbon Equity?
I have spent half my life as an entrepreneur and half as an investor. So I've been switching sides more or less every few years. I started as a student entrepreneur, built the Kleine Consultant, which is the largest student-run strategy consulting firm of the Netherlands. It's now 15 years old. But then I formally started my career in private equity. And I really learned in private equity how money decides. Money ultimately flows through our economy like, it's our lifeblood. And so I'm very interested in how I can steer outcomes through capital. And then after 4 years in private equity, I felt I desperately wanted to be on the other side of the table again. I wanted to be the builder. And then I joined Rocket Internet, moved with Rocket Internet to Southeast Asia to build that online real estate platform. And at Rocket and leading a big fintech company, also in Southeast Asia, I learned to build companies from 1 to 500 people and to really think big. I think that's what I learned at Rocket Internet. And then I accidentally became an investor again. I got asked to become a partner at Peak, which is a VC fund investing in SaaS and marketplaces in the Netherlands and Germany and the Nordics. And then in 2019, I read the book The Sixth Extinction. And it talks about the 5 major extinction events in the history of the planet. The last one was the extinction of the dinosaurs. And every extinction event in the history of the planet has gone hand in hand with rapid change in temperature and massive loss of biodiversity. But in the past 5 historical extinctions, those changes have played out over thousands of years. And in our case, where we're in the midst of the 6th great extinction, temperature changes that have in the past played out over thousands of years are compressed into the past 200-300 years since the start of the Industrial Revolution. So if you look at charts, the speed of temperature change and biodiversity loss are exponentially faster than in every other major extinction event that has wiped out up to 95% of all living species. And that for me was really a bit of a jaw drop moment to understand that, and to really, I at that point really felt like human extinction might actually happen in the coming centuries. Like this, and I realized so clearly that it really made no sense whatsoever to spend my time purely on making money or being successful in some career. It just literally made no sense, because I could end up with a big fat bank account and a lot of status, but if there is no livable planet, it just doesn't make any sense. So that's where I decided I wanted to spend the next 30 years of my life in helping, ideally 3 times 10 years, building companies that help solve climate change. And I decided that capital is my money, is basically my weapon of choice, because money decides. So I'm very interested through how through the lens of money, I can shift outcomes.
Wow. Like the first thing that comes to my mind, really many things to kind of like grasp on. But first and foremost, I agree with the money. Like, have you seen this series, The Exit?
I haven't yet. I have heard about it.
It's a fun, fun, extreme version of how life can be on the side of like money and investing and riches, actually here from Norway.
Yeah.
The fun part in that there is one interview in this series where there is one guy who says that there is only one religion that I believe in, and it's money. And it's because every religion, everyone in the world, they believe in that same notion of that you can actually have a currency that you can pay things, and a lot of their religions are also built on that currency and still use that currency. So I think there is a lot of power in money. As you're saying, with money you can move mountains. We can move it also with a lot of people, but if you have money, you can buy a lot of people. So that's just a rough fact, I think, of the world. So it's a good realization. Then the other point you have made was the student entrepreneurship side. I think one side is that you need to focus on the right things on long term, say climate or these big things. But then it's how do you really develop yourself to be able to do that, and how do you develop enough people to do it. And there I think student entrepreneurship is one of those things where you really change the way you think and the way you work and the trajectory of your life.
Yeah, agree.
Then lastly, you mentioned a lot about the sixth extinction.
Yeah.
You're saying that we really need to do something about it, so we can, so we're not like having to go there. Do you think what will happen is that we're able to slow it down so that the period before it happens will be longer if it's already happened 5 times, or can we actually remove it completely?
So what I'm very optimistic about is our ability to solve climate change with technological solutions. What I am not optimistic about, or less optimistic about, is how fast we can move. So the majority of technologies that we need to solve climate change, let's say 90% of solutions, already exist. So that's really good news. Now, not all of these technologies are cost competitive. Let's say that maybe now 10, 20% of technologies are already cost competitive or close to, and then 40, 50% of technologies are probably still quite far. There's a green premium, meaning the green alternative is still substantially more expensive than the current alternative. Think about sustainable aviation fuels. It's still like a factor 10 or 12 times more expensive than kerosene. So the question is, how fast can we develop technology to lower cost, as a result of which becomes cost competitive with the current technology? And how much natural disaster and a global instability will we rack up in the meantime? So will we ultimately get there? Yes, but I think a lot of things, including political instability, for example, can cause us to further delay and for much worse outcomes to happen than is technically needed. We know what to do. The capital is there. What we need to do is act with urgency and move capital at a really large scale into these solutions and make sure that we get there soon, because we can.
Yeah. It's a bit of the same problem that you see in many industries, say in Finland, producing milk, for example.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay example, but there you have a lot of internal competition. So you have a lot of these smaller players competing against each other, and then you have still a monopoly or almost monopoly situation on the top. Instead of fighting towards that, all these small players fight each other instead of collaborating. And that's a bit same thing. I think what is happening with the world is that we are fighting with each other instead of uniting and fighting for the bigger problem, which is actually that there is nothing to fight for soon.
Exactly.
So it's really interesting also how those things work, and is that something we can solve? Maybe, but if we can, there is actually hope. We're closer.
Yeah, and I think that brings me back a little bit to where we started with. I often say that we need some sort of a man on the moon vision. Something like an appealing vision of the future that people really want to run towards. And I think that when people have joint ownership of the solutions and the upside from that, you can create this bigger movement where people really want to sprint towards that end goal. And it becomes a collective effort instead of people sort of fighting over over the future direction.
Yeah, it's like Google X is really good at the whole moonshot thinking.
Yes.
I mean, like, love with that.
Yeah.
But I think we can like make climate change, that whole transition as sexy as money, and everyone wants it. Then we're in a pretty close place.
Yes, exactly. That's what we're trying to do.
And that's a pretty good segue. So I asked you a what if, but what is your like what if question? Do you have one of those?
Ooh. That's a really hard question. Let me think about that for a moment. Well, what if we would all optimize for what is enough instead of maximize for what could be? I think that could be a foundational change in mindset on what if we could at some point say, I have enough wealth, now I'm going to give the rest away. Or if we could say, now my company is successful enough, I'm not going to grow anymore. Could you change things in a structural way that we live in a much more balanced society where we live much more in balance with nature rather than competing with nature, and ultimately we will self-destruct as humans. It's inevitable. So that's my what if.
It's a great what if. You seem to also be pretty close to that. So could you give us some concrete tips how to actually get there? How do you change that mindset? How do you like progress yourself to that direction? How did you get there?
I can't say that I'm there yet.
No, but on the good way.
I think I don't myself particularly care about money. What I do care about is freedom. And I think every entrepreneur is more motivated by freedom than by money. So what I would like to get to at some point is a level of financial freedom. But beyond that, I have no desires. I don't need to live in a big house. My dream car is a old Fiat 500 car.
Nice.
So I probably can buy that already. I do want to pursue growth for myself in learning. I do want to pursue growth for my company because I believe that the impact of my company is equivalent to the size. So my big hairy audacious goal is to mobilize at least 10 billion in private capital in the next 10 years for climate solutions. I have been thinking about limits to wealth, about setting a maximum amount above which I would give away everything else. And I think it's quite interesting to think about that in advance before you get to such level of wealth, because it's much more harder, for example, for next gens, right, who inherit a lot of wealth. Super hard to give that away or to touch what I call is base capital, sort of like the amount of capital that they inherited. A lot of people grow up with the idea that I need to pass it on to the next generation. I can't touch it. I need to grow that. And I think it's much easier to give away money than when you don't have it yet than when you do have it. So yeah, I mean, I'm not at all there yet, but it's definitely a topic that I'm thinking about because I think fundamentally as a society, we cannot continue to grow. There's a really cool podcast on that by Nate Higgins and Daniel Schumpeter, I think, which is called Bend Not Break. And they explain that the world has finite resources. Even if we continue to grow at 1 or 2% per year, there will be a time where you hit the limit of your finite resources. And we're super close to those planetary boundaries in many ways. So we it is not in a way tenable to keep on growing forever. And so I'm very interested in how do you pivot from our current sort of growth economy to a economy where you live in balance with your natural resources and you're constantly optimizing for balance rather than for some sort of maximization. And how? That's a big question.
Yeah, I was just going to think that.
I guess steward ownership moves in that direction, right? Where you say, we're not optimizing purely for shareholders, we're optimizing for all stakeholders, including nature. I mean, I've heard of companies that have planet Earth on their board. They literally have a lawyer representing planet Earth. And where you are not maximizing, but you basically say, there's a cap. I think OpenAI, which was at least steward ownership, said we have 100 times return on investment cap. And beyond that, it goes into trust, for example. So I think we're starting to see a couple of edits, if you will, to capitalism, which maybe result in a more healthy system.
I agree. That movement is like a lot happening. You said a really, really good big question there in the end. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go into that. I think it would take at least another half an hour. But actually, that's a really good topic for us to maybe tap on in the future. I'd love to discuss about that. I think maybe to summarize, I think one of the things that you said is the fundamental thing to all of the change and actually like making this happen. And it's actually starting to think about it. It's so simple. Many people don't put thought in it.
Yeah.
And then when you summarize all of that together, and what you get is that first you're chasing all of this money all of your life. Then when you get it, if you're actually able to give it away, go really back to like these old Southeast Asian principles where you first do a beautiful painting, and when it's ready, just wipe it out.
Yeah.
And then it's actually the journey that you truly enjoy.
Yeah.
It's been a super good conversation. I've learned a lot, and I'm actually really inspired to maybe progress towards a bit different direction that I've been thinking. And I think that's what most of the people need. Do you have one last sentence of inspiration or thought or a snippet or something you would like to say here in the end?
You only live once, make it worthwhile, I think. Yeah.
That's a really good one.
Solve problems worth solving.
Yeah, it's really good. Thank you so much. I can't wait to see you later at the Catapult Future Fest. Hopefully I have had a fun time and we'll have even more fun.
Cool. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.